So as we just mentioned, Ryan and Emily hosted kind of a major debate yesterday between streamer Destiny, real name Stephen Bennell, and Omar Baddar, who is a fantastic expert on the Middle East and Israel-Palestine specifically. I got to watch the whole rough cut last night. First of all, kudos to both of you, because it's not easy. It's almost harder when you're a duo. Saagar and I have experience to know when to jump in, how to manage it. It's a difficult balance to keep things on the rails, but also to make sure that they're able to engage with each other. I thought you guys both did a fantastic job with that. Before, we've got a couple of like little highlight clips that we want to share with the audience. But before I do that, I mean, what was your kind of like, what was the vibe? What was your sense of how this all went?
Yeah. Vibes were good. Vibes were exactly what you would expect from that conversation. Now, I hadn't watched previously. They did a debate. I didn't know that before we had booked them. Yeah, so we kind of had to go back and figure out what their dynamic was. They had met before, and then they'd continued to exchange these barbs online, nasty stuff. Like
all
really,
this was new to us. We were not actually trying to do a round two.
Keep yourself out.
Right.
Yeah.
You didn't intend a grudge match. It just kind of,
Yeah, but we also like wanted to make sure that it didn't go down a rabbit hole of just personal, because you know the YouTube beef sometimes it's like it's insufferable. Sometimes you're just like, well, you said this on this stream on this day, so we wanted to make sure that didn't happen, and I think that worked.
Yeah, it actually was pretty substantive. Because it's like, on the one hand, it's kind of embarrassing. You're like, really? You're gonna have a streamer on who just kind of only learned in October? It's like like he says, like I learned in October about this issue. I didn't care about it before. But he is an extremely sharp guy. And he makes a lot of the arguments that you see being made from people in his camp.
Yeah.
And he makes them very effectively.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I think it's useful to see how those can and can't be, combated, counteracted. And I think we also brought it to a little bit of a higher level where we ask questions about kind of broader issues like racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, like root causes and root solutions to the conflict, which you can't really take those down a rabbit hole and kind of get distracted. And I thought that was the most enlightening part.
The only other thing I would add to that is the value of the way Destiny approaches it is he says things that people on his side think, but probably would just tiptoe around and wouldn't actually just
honest and actually gets out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then and then Omar can respond to that instead of like, tiptoeing around it.
Right.
It's useful to have the actual position laid out.
Right.
Because when you get into the, well, I didn't say that, it's like, yeah, but you freaking mean it. We all know what you mean to say, so that is helpful when you actually, just say it.
Just say it.
Just say that they're using cookies to make rockets, for example, as one thing that came up in the debate.
That's a good one.
In any case, the first clip we have for you is an exchange about safe zones in the context of like, okay, like if you're a Palestinian in Gaza, what do you do? Let's take a listen to how that went down.
Look, they've destroyed 80% of the buildings.
No, they haven't.
They've displaced.
That number is not true.
They've displaced 90% of the population. Can you name any other conflict in which you displaced 90% of the civilian population?
No, because usually they just destroyed them. You think in Dresden they told the civilians to flee? Do you think in the Tokyo firebombings they told the civilians to leave? For Nagasaki and Hiroshima, did we tell the civilians to leave? Can you hold on? Can you acknowledge that what you just said was incredibly fucking stupid? That no, they don't tell civilians to leave first. Normally they just kill them.
Yeah.
Can you acknowledge that?
So because we knew.
No, I need to hear an acknowledgement.
Because he thinks that's such a clever line. Let me explain something to you.
He's not going
to acknowledge it. No, I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to acknowledge it. Yes, they told civilians to leave, and then they dropped massive 2,000 bombs on the safe zones that they told the civilians to flee to.
There was one safe zone, the beach or whatever,
there have been countless incidents of them dropping. Now you're just lying.
I'm not. I looked it up. You look up all the data on all the safe zones. There's 4 hours of roads that they make safe per day where they guarantee travel.
There's a New York Times
investigation. That they have not attacked.
There's a New York Times investigation and there's an NBC investigation. Both of them document the fact that Israel is bombing safe zones where they tell civilians to flee.
And Israel admitted this. Israel admitted this.
Hold on.
Israel admitted at CNN that intelligence indication that these places were safe houses for commanders of the Rafah Brigade of the Hamas terror organization. This was back in December about bombing areas that were supposed to be evacuation routes.
Evacuation routes are not safe zones. There's been one official declared safe zone.
Shouldn't it be safe?
Shouldn't Hamas not operate from there? I mean, we're talking again.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Okay, so
spirited, but good.
The safe zone they're talking about, El Mawasi, is what he I think is referring to there, and I want to get your reaction.
Actually, I was gonna say I asked him if that's what he was referring to. I wrote it down on a piece of paper because we had it fact checked, and I handed it over to him, and he said yes.
Yes, that's it, El Mawasi. So we covered when they at first were like, go to Al-Mawasi. There's like nothing there. There's no infrastructure. There's not sufficient sanitation, water, food, et cetera. The idea that millions of Palestinians could shelter in this area is preposterous. But he's kind of getting this technicality of like, well, this is the official safe zone. So no, safe routes, evacuation routes, that doesn't count. I'm talking about specifically this one safe zone.
And I think why it's useful for people to see this is this was the most kind of bitchy, nasty back and forth, whereas I think everything else was a little bit calmer and more reasoned might not be the word, but more reasoned. Like that
the cookies were kind of bitchy.
It was. I mean,
you were kind of bitchy, right?
There was other bitchiness, which I don't mind, right?
No,
but I mean, overall,
I thought this was the height of it.
This was one of the more like tense, you know, and sort of messy.
But honestly, it wasn't that bad. I've seen it, 10 times worse, and that is more, a shout out to your guys' moderation. How was it with Omar as well? Like in terms of the challenging questions, did you throw it to him more? Was Destiny throwing things to him? How was it handling that?
Destiny was actually, I thought, respectful of Omar's time in a way that I was worried he might not be. Like when we would come in and be like, look, enough. Let him respond. He would actually let him respond.
Yeah.
Omar was very good at not taking the bait. He called him effing stupid.
Yeah, that's right.
At another time, he said, I think you're probably more anti-Semitic than we even know, or something just a nasty personal attack that was completely baseless.
Okay.
And he didn't really take the bait, and because I think he understood that Destiny was going to try to base ourselves with this stuff.
Yes.
Mr. Bertucci.
Kyle and I interviewed Omar shortly after his last debate with Destiny. And a debate that he found to be extremely frustrating. And he's not a YouTuber like we are, right? He didn't know who Destiny was, and he hadn't consumed his content. So he didn't really, when he agreed to the debate, I think he didn't initially, like the first one, really know what he was getting. And so I think between then and this one, I think he was able to develop better strategies for handling some of the tactics that were thrown out. I mean, Destiny is like, obviously he has assimilated a large amount of information about this conflict in a very short period of time, a large amount of propaganda talking points, in my opinion, in a very short period of time. He's able to roll them out very effectively. There was nothing you guys asked him about that he wasn't ready with an answer, that he hadn't thought through, that he wasn't able to do. And I mean, his whole thing and why he's popular and successful, right? He's a debate bro. So he's good at this. And so it seemed to me like Omar was able to kind of come up with some better strategies than the first time that he met up with Destiny that created the initial, YouTube beef situation.
I thought Omar was good often at kind of meta-identifying what Destiny was doing.
Yes.
Saying like, okay, in this moment, what you are doing is trying to get me to chase this.
Right.
So that you can avoid answering this.
Yeah, because he would say, okay, way to raise a totally irrelevant rabbit hole point that's going to distract me in this direction, but I'm going to focus on, yes, that's it. He did do a good job. Because
otherwise, Destiny will say, well, you're avoiding answering at this point. It's like, well, the reason I'm avoiding is because it's just a distraction.
Well, we have a second clip here that we can play about the March of Return. This was another interesting moment that we wanted to highlight for everybody. Let's take a listen. We'll get the reaction on the other side.
Towards the end of the Great March of Return, there were people that were throwing stones, that were sending over incendiary balloons, that were causing fires to spread on the other side of the fence. All of this is documented even by the UN, and that was when the majority of the firing from the Israeli police happened. If you want to say that they shouldn't be shooting at people who were close to the fence because you don't like that policy or whatever, that's fine. But characterizing that as just open firing into a bunch of innocent people that are standing there with the goal of just maiming people for no reason is the most unbelievable retelling of what happened towards the end of that event.
It's exactly what happened, actually.
Just to characterize it, get a even more complete picture. Israeli policy is people in Gaza have no right to go in and out of the cage that they've been placed into. They're under complete siege. Their economy is in shambles because Israel does not allow them to trade with the outside world. They can't have an airport because Israel doesn't feel like they are entitled to an airport, can't have a seaport. When you look at the rates of unemployment, over 50% in Gaza at the time. And if those people who are trapped in this cage come a little too close to the border, then we open fire at them and kill them, even when they're unarmed, because that's border policy.
It's more than 6,000, according to the UN, quote unquote, more than 6,000 unarmed demonstrators were shot by military snipers week after week at the protest sites by the separation fence.
There's no denying that, yes, some people try to open up and some people send incendiary balloons over the border and so on. But by and large, when you look at the cases, human rights organizations have been clear about the fact that people were targeted when they posed absolutely no threat to Israeli soldiers. So Israeli soldiers opened fire on people and targeted specifically medics and journalists and children and people who are disabled in wheelchairs.
There's a very clever game that's being played when we say pose no threat to Israeli soldiers. There was one UN report that came out that analyzed it, that claimed that every single shooting except for one was unjustified. But the way that they got that is they didn't analyze that as an armed conflict. They analyzed that as a policing event. And when you analyze things internationally as a policing event, typically police aren't allowed to shoot or kill anybody unless they pose a direct threat to the individual.
Yeah. Why would it be analyzed as an armed conflict if one side wasn't armed?
Because Hamas was present.
But they weren't shooting. They weren't.
It doesn't matter if they were shooting. If you've got an enemy military that is present amongst people that are performing actions that are Hamas is considered the oppositional force, and if you've got people that are participating,
and if you don't have guns at the time,
doesn't matter if you have guns or not.
Of course,
guns
it does.
have nothing to do with being
international humanitarian law is
force.
absolutely clear about the fact that a situation you can only kill combatants if they're in combat and they're armed. You can't find somebody.
That is absolutely not true. You do not become hors de combat. You do not all of a sudden gain the protections of a civilian if you're an enemy combatant without a gun. That is absolutely true.
If you happen to go home, of course you do. You should familiarize yourself with international humanitarian law.
Enemy combatant. Google IHL hors de combat.
Let's do that.
That is absolutely
just to go back to a point that you made earlier about sort of.
Wait, hold on, just to be clear. I just want to So you're saying that like if there's a military and you're fighting the enemy and you guys are going to lose, if you just drop your guns, you can just like run back and nobody can shoot at you?
Yes, if you drop your guns and raise your arms, you can't be shot anymore.
You're surrendering. That's different than running away. You can't drop your guns and just run away, and you can't get shot because you have no firearm.
Okay, that exchange made me a little insane. Ryan, what's your reaction after the fact?
And I thought the whole March of Return conversation was interesting from beginning to end because he just kind of mentioned the March of Return as something that, as an example of something that Hamas had done that had kind of triggered Israel to like attack it. And Omar and I pointed out it was a civil society-led nonviolent action.
Right.
And that later led into, I thought, the most useful conversation, which was that Hamas was pressured by the nonviolent civil society-led March of Return into eventually supporting it. They didn't want to because it takes away from their argument, which is that only armed resistance is appropriate against Israel. And it made our point that the way to dismantle the ideology of Hamas is through nonviolence, is through peace, is through reaching a deal with the Palestinians. It is the violence by the Israelis toward the Palestinians that actually supports the ideology of Hamas. And that I thought was the most interesting part of the debate, to tackle that broader subject.
Because that was really important. I thought that you brought up a couple of times, Ryan, that if you look at Hamas popularity, it plummets when there's an actual possibility of negotiated peace. And when there's not, and when it feels to Palestinians like my only chance is armed, like nothing else is working, we do the Great March of Return, it's overwhelmingly nonviolent, and we get snipers firing at us, like what the hell are we supposed to do here? That's when support, predictably, and also when your mom and your brother and your sister are being slaughtered, guess what? That's probably going to create a lot more commitment to terrorism.
And Destiny understands that on the other side because he's very quick to say, look, the reason Israelis want to genocide the Palestinians is because of the Second Intifada and the suicide bombings. Well, why doesn't it work the other way? Of course it does.
I also thought that exchange, though, was very illustrative of a technique that he uses very effective, which is it got bogged down in this question about armed combatants and dropping your weapons and whatever. It's like
international humanitarian
how did you feel?
And whether it was a police action or a military action.
It's a good thing that Emily is a Geneva Convention.
It takes you away from the basic facts. Because this is what people, if Palestinians had their own Gandhi, if they had their own nonviolent, it could be over so quickly. And it's like, well, they tried that. And so you get away from these basic facts of they tried that, and thousands of them were hit with sniper bullets and intentionally maimed, and medics and journalists targeted. All of this is accurate, documented by human rights organizations. It gets you away from those very uncomfortable facts and arguing about some little minor technicality that he's educated himself on and everyone's else like, I don't really know about
There's a strategic and moral question of whether it is good for either cause to kill unarmed protesters.
Right.
And then there's the legal question of whether or not they are engaged, whether or not they're allowed to kill them because Hamas count as police or Hamas count as combatants who are somewhere within the vicinity. And so they're like, so we kept trying to push it back to the strategic and moral and ethical questions and keep it away from these rabbit holes.
Any last thoughts, Emily?
Well, I think to the extent that you can have a spoiler for a debate, what Krystal just mentioned about Ryan's point on peace, support for peace declining in those particular moments is the devastating, that I felt like, and that comes towards the end. I felt like that was clearly a moment where we all sort of looked around and were like, but he kind of, I don't want to say he changed the terms, but then he said, but we're talking about peace from a Western perspective. What both sides really want is justice. And that is, again, like coming to that later in the debate, we just sort of looked around and were like,
All right. And then he dips into weird,
Yeah.
Oriental stuff.
Okay. Well, so as we said
alert.
already, it's a 2-hour debate, literally 2 hours to the mark. Congratulations.
It was
It's
actually hard
difficult.
to wrap.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been there. I understand it.
No, we were getting the messages in real time
Yes,
where Max like, you could probably wrap up
just
now,
wrap
and then
it
it
up.
goes into
30
like some whole
minutes later.
conversation about human shields, which
Right.
is another interesting moment. Human shields, okay, when the IDF uses them, based on, again, some, legalese, whatever. Cookies being used to build rockets was another interesting moment.
Yes, and it's also, it's not a total pile-on, and we maybe made it sound like that, but like there are some things that I agree with Destiny on, and there were some moments where we pushed Omar, and he was in good faith, willing to engage them.
I think people who watch it, even if if you share Destiny's view, if you share Omar's view, I think you're going to feel like your view was well represented, right? I mean,
and that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You guys did a really effective job, like I said, moderating it, creating that climate, I think making everybody feel like they had a chance. I also will just say, as like, having watched so many of these Israel debates at this point, one-on-one is so much better. It's than when you have the panel of freaking 4 people and everybody's trying. It's so much better to have had Omar and Destiny have it well moderated. That to me is like the best model. I think that's why you were able to get to so many interesting substantive conversations. I'm very excited for people to watch that. I'm really excited about you guys doing the Friday show because I think this is just a great preview of things to come.
This is an awesome proof of concept.
Plus Ryan's getting fashion tips from Don Lemon.
Ryan's getting fashion tips.
Just for
what
the
else
record,
could we ask
for the record,
for?
I had this last spring. I just wasn't wearing it in the winter.
Okay.
That's all.
All right.
But Don's right. Don's right. The
Subscribe
dark suit
to
too
Breaking Points if you want to watch it early. It will drop tonight for our premium subscribers. It'll be publicly available tomorrow. Support us there if you want to be able to support Friday shows like this. It's a great proof of concept for what we're all about.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.